Everyone, this is Brick City Brown Chick coming at you for another week. And today I'm going to talk about an issue that affects me tremendously. And I know enough folks to know that it affects other people too. And that is medical trauma. Now, what do I mean by trauma? What I mean is dealing with doctors and procedures stresses me out. And I know most people don't enjoy going to the doctor, but it ramps up my anxiety like few things can. As a woman in my 50s, I have my share of doctors. And actually, I have more doctors than most people I know because I have some significant health issues. I go to the doctor, I have my tests done, do the things that I'm supposed to do, but none of that means it is easy for me. Now, why do I have trauma surrounding doctors or related to doctors? In my life, I have had I've had four major surgeries. And by major surgeries, I'm not talking about plastic surgery or something like that. I've had brain surgery, I've had colon surgery, I've had a hysterectomy. So I've had things that are big deals that take long periods of time to recover from. And in those procedures, I have had good medical care. I have been fortunate that way. But the unfortunate part or the downside is I have had some doctors that have little to no people skills. When I hear people talk about the complexities of the American medical system and what things need to be changed, I rarely hear people talk about the way doctors are trained. And I think the way doctors are trained in this country is a huge problem. I'm going to set aside issues that women and people of color have with doctors because that's a whole nother conversation. But doctors in general in America, the doctors that I've dealt with over my 50 odd years, they seriously lack training in empathy and in people skills. What do I mean by that? I'm going to use the brain surgery I had to have almost 18 years ago now as an example. When a doctor sits you down and says, here's the problem, and in order to fix it, we have to cut a hole in your skull and do some things and then sew you up, and then you've got to go heal. It's super traumatic. And do I have the expectation that a doctor's gonna sit and cry with me and talk me through it? Absolutely not. That's why I have a husband. That's why I have loved ones. That's why I have friends. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about how patients are treated emotionally in the process of dealing with their disease. Doctors are taught how to treat diseases. They are generally not taught how to treat patients. And I think what doctors need to learn is that diseases are attached to people. So you have to treat the disease, yes, but you also have to treat the person. The doctor who did my brain surgery was at the top of his field, at the top of his game. Everybody, of course, I got a second opinion and a third opinion because, yeah, I did. And everybody I saw said, you've seen the best man for several 100-mile radius in the Baltimore, Washington area If somebody I loved needed to have this surgery, this is the person I would want to do it. Okay, great. But his interactions with me were horrendous. That's the only word I can use. I saw him for almost a year before the surgery was done. So in that time period, I had 5 or 6 appointments with him. So it was like every other month, and we had to do MRIs and we had to do CAT scans and all this stuff. Now I was a grown woman, I was married, I had a job, I had a whole bunch of other responsibilities, but I still had to cope with this situation. And I had a list of questions because anybody having brain surgery is gonna have a list of questions. And I would ask him the same questions every time I had an appointment with him. And probably 3 appointments into it, he got really frustrated with me and said, "You ask me the same questions every time you're here. I don't understand what the problem is. I've explained to you what's wrong with you, and now you need to make the decision about whether you're going to have the surgery or not." And my response to him was, "You want to cut a hole in my skull. You're going to answer the questions I have, no matter how many times I have them, because I want to see if you're going to give me the same answers. You want to cut a hole in my skull." So it was a very adversarial doctor patient relationship. It continued after the surgery. The day of the surgery lasted 9 hours. He came out to my husband and my mother in the waiting room after the surgery and said something incredibly offensive that nearly made my husband want to punch him in the face. I mean, it was just an awful experience. Did he fix my problem? Yes. Have I had any problems in the 18 years since I healed? No, I have not. But my experience with him on a person to person level was absolutely terrible. Now, why am I talking about this, about medical trauma today? I'm talking about this because next week I have to have a colonoscopy. And if you're a person under 50 or just not in the medical field or whatever, they need to look at my colon and make sure it's okay. There's no signs of cancer. This is a standard test that people over 50 have to have. You know, what everybody says is it's not a big deal. For someone like me, this is a big deal. When I was in my 20s, it was my last year of college, that's a story in and of itself. I had chicken pox when I was 21. It was all bad. But over that year, I started to have issues with my colon. And the most YouTube friendly way to say this is food would go in and food would not come out easily. That's the most YouTube friendly way I can say that. And so it reached a point where I needed to go to the hospital, have myself flushed out, also YouTube friendly, and then they needed to investigate what exactly the problem was. Okay, they couldn't really figure it out. They basically said, if you have more problems, come back to the hospital. Now, as a reminder, I went to college in a podunk, middle of nowhere town in Western Pennsylvania. Not someplace I'd trust doctors to do serious care, is what I'll say. So, time went forward and got into my 20s and got into my late 20s, probably. And my husband and I were dating at that point, but we weren't married. But I started to have similar issues again. So now I'm in the Baltimore, Washington area, one of the top 2 or 3 places in the country in terms of medical care. So I went to a doctor and they said, okay, we don't know what's going on your internal workings. But what our tests have shown is that you are now iron deficient because you're having these issues. So they put me on iron pills. All right, the pills were horse pills, is all I can describe them as, but they were fine. I took them, it's what I was supposed to do. Unbeknownst to me, because the doctor didn't tell me, if you are a pre-menopausal woman, in other words, if you're a woman who still has a period, large doses of iron cause intestinal issues. So, what did my taking iron lead to? Right back to issues with the colon. So, I finally went to a specialist, and the specialist said, he looked at me and said, if I had a dime for every woman your age who's come into my office and told me this story, I'd be a millionaire. And essentially, what he said was, yeah, this iron has caused issues because you're not postmenopausal. You don't need this much iron. It's caused tears in your colon, which the medical term for that is fissures. So they went in, did a colonoscopy, confirmed that is what the problem was, and that he would need to go in and make repairs to the tears in my colon. So that was a whole traumatic experience in and of itself. So we're flashing forward 30 years, and now I'm at an age where I have to have colonoscopies. I think it's every 5 years if you don't have a family history. Don't quote me on that. It's either 3 years or 5 years. And now I have to deal with the trauma of everything I went through before, and also now prepare to have this colonoscopy. So I am very stressed. I am having bad flashbacks. And I just know walking into this appointment next week, I am going to probably have doctors and nurses, people who do this all the time, for whom this is not a big deal, who do not understand the place I am coming from in terms of the trauma surrounding this situation. And I'm not going to react well. I know that going in. My husband's going to have to cope with the aftermath of that after I get home and am unhappy and frustrated and stressed out yet again because I'm dealing with people who understand how to treat disease but don't understand how to treat people. My advice to people who have this kind of trauma is you have to meditate, you have to breathe through it, you have to work through it. The choice you can't make for your own health is to not do it, is to not go to your appointments, is to not have your tests. That's the option you can't take because that's detrimental to your health and it's dangerous, honestly. So you have to work through this process, but I'm not telling you it's easy. I'm not telling you it's fun. I'm not telling you you won't be frustrated, aggravated, maybe even pissed off. I've gotten pissed off at doctor's appointments because they're either not listening or not understanding. And there's an old expression that goes, patient, heal thyself. And what that means is you have to be the advocate for you. And I've become a huge believer in that in a lot of areas of my life, but especially when it comes to medicine. If doctors want to prescribe me things that I've taken before and had bad reactions to, or don't think is going to help the situation, I make that clear to them. I let them know I am not a passive patient. And that's another key thing I want everybody to remember is you've got to advocate for yourself. So make sure your doctors understand what you want, what you hear, what you see, and what works for you. A lot of doctors give off the impression, and some will even say to you, look, who went to medical school, you or me? And my reaction to that is, you did, but who are you doing this to? You're doing this to me. Therefore, I want all the information I can have as a patient to make sure this is done correctly and we get a good outcome. And as the patient, the only person who's going to do that for you is you. So, everybody who's living with and working their way through medical trauma, I hear you. I understand you. You got to keep moving forward. So that's my thoughts for this week. I want to thank everybody for joining me. You can find my podcast, the Brick City Brown Chick Podcast, on my YouTube page. If you go to youtube.com, it's /Brick City Brown Chick. If you have a hard time finding it, just type Brick City Brown Chick into YouTube. You'll get an avatar of me with a huge afro, and you'll have access to all of my previous shows and my shorts and other content. Thank you for joining me, everybody, and I will see you again next week. Bye-bye.